to do today is we're going to play with strings. We'll play with strings and lists. We're going to format strings with escape characters. We're going to manipulate strings with method and operators, and we're going to make lists. With strings, there's many different things that you can do. Strings are very powerful, and one of the most powerful things you can use is a backslash. Ordinarily, for example, if you have something in code that means something else, like for example here, you have beginning and end of a quote, right? If you want to use an actual apostrophe, you have to use a backslash. So the backslash is very powerful. There are other things that it can do. You can indicate a new line by using the backslash and an N. You can use a actual backslash in a string you're writing if you use the double backslash. That's how the computer recognizes it. Here we see up here once again, if you want to use an actual apostrophe, a backslash in front of the apostrophe will do the job. If you want to use a quotation mark, so the slash is a cure-all for your strings. If you want to put a tab in your string, you can always do a slash T. And it's just a slash by itself will make a new line continue. So what I did was I opened up a regular Python idle shell. Not the interactive one that you used before, just the regular idle shell. Okay, so we're just going to open up a new window. This is important. You want to make sure that you're opening up a new window. So what you do here is you're going to type, this is a really long string that keeps on going and going. So I put print. This is a really long string that keeps going and going and going. But if you want to keep all the text in the window, use a new line escape character. I'll show you that's all in this line that I just typed. So I'm going to press the enter key, and some of the text is not showing in the window. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the cursor to the space between the two of the words I can see before the string goes off the right edge of the window, and I can just type a backspace in there. So now I move the enter key to move the rest of the string to the next line. So is the string still going off the right edge of the window? If it were, I just type a new backspace and enter. Now the backspace is a key above your enter key, not your forward slash. So I can click enter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go save. And I'm going to make a folder on my desktop called 7A. Click create new folder, call it 7A, because I'll put on my assignment 7A's in here, and I'll click open, and I'll just call this new line .python.py. I'm going to click save. So now I should be able to run this. There you go. Now once again I open up idle. I've saved my other file, and I'm going to make a new file. File, open. I'm going to take my dialog box, and I'm going to go to my library and my documents, and I'm going to find my file for this class. It's going to be in section 7. My folders for section 7. Click here, all files, and I'm going to open Alice. Now I'm going to save this. I put this in my 7A folder. And I'm going, instead of calling this Alice text, I'm going to backspace over the txt. I'm going to put py to save that as Python. So now what I'm going to do is go up to the top here, and I'm going to click enter, Now I'm going to take this whole chapter from Alice in Wonderland and I'm going to make it into a variable. Like x is equal to y, the y is going to be this whole chapter. So here we go. Alice, so my variable Alice is equal to this whole chapter. How do we do that? Here you go. And I come all the way down to the end. I tell it to end here. So now my chapter 7 string has been assigned to the variable Alice. In case you're worried about copyright issues, Alice's Adventure in Wonderland was published in 1885. The copyright is expired. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to count the words in a string. We're going to count how many words there are in Alice here. Now you know that Python really doesn't have a built-in method for counting the number of words in a string. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the split and the len functions. This way we're going to count the words in the string. We use a split function to split a string into a list of words. And then we're going to use the list len function. And that will count the elements in the list. Now if you don't include an argument between the parentheses, the split method will split a string at each space. Then the length, or the len method, will return the number that's pretty close to the actual word count of the string. This technique really isn't totally accurate because some words are separated by something other than a space, like a dash or something. But for this lesson, it's close enough. One way to print both a string literal and the output of a string method is to separate the different print arguments with a comma. One advantage to listing print arguments with a comma instead of adding them with a plus operator is that a space character is automatically added between the outprint of the print arguments. So now we're going to count the approximate number of words in the string. So I'm going to put 2 blank lines at the bottom here. Now I'm going to type print total number of words, length Alice split. So now I'm going to click the File menu and then click Save. And then I'm going to run this. So it tells me there are approximately 2,287 words. So what did we just do here? The shell prints the length of the list. It created it by splitting the Alice string value at every space. Okay, the shell prints the length of the list, so the value of the string is really unchanged. Let's count sentences now. Well, you obviously know that Python doesn't have any method for counting the number of sentences in a string. But most sentences end with a period. So you can use the split method to create a list of string elements that are split using a period. And we're going to use this by using the period as the argument for the split method. Once again, it isn't a perfect way of counting sentences. You have exclamation points or question marks, that kind of thing. And you can also have, abbreviations like Mr., Ms., that kind of thing. So in this lesson, it's okay that the sentence counts won't be totally accurate, but it'll give you approximation. So in addition to using the len and the split methods to count the sentences, you can also use the count method to count the number of periods. So we're going to use these techniques next. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to type print total number of sentences. Length Alice split. Instead of using a space this time, I'm going to use a period. So now I'm going to add additional command. I'm going to put in there print total number of periods, alice.count. So now I'm going to save the program and run it and see how this works. So now we have the total number of sentences and the total number of periods. It's pretty close. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to count a word and we're going to use user input. Okay? So now if you want to count the number of times a word is going to appear in a string, you're going to use a count method, and you're going to use a string as an argument. You can use a count method with the Alice variable to count the number of times a word appears in the Alice string. You could write the count method for your Python program with a string literal as a count method's argument. The problem is your program would only search for that specific word each time. So, if you wanted to search for a different word, you would have to change the string literal value in the code and rerun the program. Instead, in order to increase the program's interactivity, you can use the input function to allow the user to type in a word for the program to count. And then you can let the user search for a different word each time the program is run. This lets any user search for a word, not just someone who knows how to write Python code. So of course that means we're going to use the input function to let the user ask for a word to count. And then you're going to assign the input value to a variable called countWords. Then you're going to use the countWords variable the user created as the count method's argument. So here we go. Next thing I do is I go to the bottom of the program and I type countWords equals input. So that I'm going to have the user enter a word to count and then press enter. So I'll type that in. Now I go to the bottom of the program and then I type print. You typed, comma, countWords. And now I'm going to add print. There are, they'll put in Alice count words, instances of count words. So I'm going to tell the user whatever they counted in is going to be the instance of count words. So I'm going to save this and I'm going to run this. Now I'm going to put in a word here. I'm going to put in Alice. And it gives me 51 instances of Alice. So now we're going to make a list of sentences. Right now the Alice string is one long string value, but you can make it easier to use by breaking it up into a list of elements. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to break up the Alice string into a list with each sentence as a separate list element. So we're just going to use the split method to split the string into a new list element at each period. So now we're going to create a new variable and then assign it the list created through the split method on the Alice string. Okay, we're going to manipulate this list of sentences in a little bit. So after this count word variable here, I'm going to enter a line and I'm going to type split Alice equals Alice split at the period, right? Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way to the bottom of the program and tell my program to print split Alice. So here I go saving it. And I'm going to run it. Put in red. So the program prints the split Alice list with the escaped N sequences. See, here's escape N sequences right here. Now, it might take you a few minutes after Python to print the split Alice list. And your Python windows can freeze and say they're not responding. But it usually just means you need a few more minutes to run the program. So what we're going to do next is we're going to replace all those escape sequences. You know, the backslash n's that are all the way through our list. These new line characters that are printed in the list make it more difficult to read the sentences in the list. So now that the sentences are split up as elements in a list, you don't need those new line characters anymore. Instead, all you're going to do is you're going to add code that's going to replace those new line characters with just blank spaces as it splits into a list. So this is how we're going to do that. Come here after where it says split Alice is equal to Alice split. So after that, we're going to go replace. We'll put our parentheses there. So we're going to replace. So we're going to replace our escape character, our backspace in. What we're going to replace it with, comma. We're going to replace it with a space. So we just put a space in there. So we put in our period. Now all we have to do is save this. and run it. So now we type in a word once again. The program prints the split Alice list without the escaped end sequences. So it might once again take a few minutes for Python to print that split Alice list, and your Python windows may freeze and say they're not responding, but once again, they might just need a couple more minutes to run the program, or you may need to close Python and reopen it again and try running the program again. So now let's try this. We're going to come to the bottom, and we're going to see how many elements there are on the list. So we're going to type in there print, and in quotation marks, the number of elements in the list, comma, length, split Alice. See how many there are. So we're going to save it, and we're going to run it. So we count words again. There you go. Once again, it can take a few minutes for Python to do this. Your windows can freeze, but just wait. Or if you're still having problems, just close out your program, open it again, and run it. So now what would you want to do if you wanted to sort the list in alphabetical order? Have you ever thought about that? The elements are in the same sentence order as the string value right now, but one of the advantages of a list data type over a string is that the order of the elements in a list can be changed. This changes the list value, which means you don't have to assign the new reordered list value to a new variable. All you need to do is change the list value directly. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a sort function to sort the list. The sort function is just a list method, and it sorts the elements in a list. So we're going to use this function without an argument between the parentheses. So what that'll make it do is it'll make it sort the elements into an alphabetical order. You just include it after a list or after a variable, the sort function, so that it has a list as its value. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort the elements of the list and assign it to the list var. So we're going to come down before this split Alice command here, click enter, and we're going to type split Alice sort. So now this function is going to alphabetize our elements. So I'm going to go file save, and we're going to watch it go to work with the run command. Put me some word in there. So there you go. All the sentences are in alphabetical order. Once again, may take you a couple minutes to do this, but you're done. Now we don't want to print all of the list, we just want to print some of it. Sometimes you want to do that. There are several ways to print a limited number of elements in a list. So what we're going to do is we just want the list to print the first 10 elements in the list. So we're going to make a for loop, generate the first few sentences. Okay, the range 10 function generates integers from 0 to 9. It iterates through the loops 10 times, one for each integer. So it's going to print the first 10 alphabetical sentences. Okay. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to come to the bottom of our code here, and we're going to comment out the print Alice command, and we're going to go to the very bottom, and we're going to type our code here. For I in range, for the first 0 to 9, for the first 10 sentences, you want to print all of them. Okay, so let's try this with save this, and we'll run it. So there you go. There's your first 10 sentences, alphabetized. So to turn in your 7A assignment, make sure that you have both files, Alice and New Line. Zip it and send it, and you're done.